Happy holidays, everyone, and welcome to the first installment of Burny's Briefing Room. Today on the show, we have a War Commander community legend, Wrongthinker. We're going to be discussing what we learned from Operation Thorium Rush and how we're applying that knowledge to future monthly events. We also want to throw a thank you to everyone who filled out the event survey. The team has been going through the results this week, and we're really excited about what we've learned so far. Before we bring Wrongthinker out, I wanted to update you guys on von Kruger's Verkraft and the threat that they pose to the sector. Verkraft have always lusted for our supplies of thorium, but a recent discovery has them risking it all. My intel reports that Kruger has discovered a massive thorium vein running deep underneath the sector, and he will stop at nothing to claim it. A vein of this magnitude has the potential to cause serious devastation to all that we hold dear. We need your help to ensure Kruger and the Verkraft don't begin the mining operations in the sector. Can we count on you? That's some pretty serious stuff. We also wanted to update you guys on some common concerns that we're seeing from the community, from the forums to Facebook, to in-game chat and everywhere in between. The leaderboards are a hot topic, obviously. We have some big changes coming to them very soon. I can't go quite into detail yet, but what I can tell you is that the leaderboards are basically being built up, from the ground up, and they're all going to be consolidated into one menu, and the functionality will, work properly. We also have an exciting video for you guys coming out soon about the Siege Squadron, so stay tuned for that. You can keep an eye on our YouTube channel, the official Kixeye YouTube, as well as, our Facebook pages and the forums, because we'll be posting it everywhere. Awesome. So now, without further ado, he's the lead game designer for War Commander, and at least some of the brains behind many of the units and events that we all love. Help me welcome Wrongthinker to the briefing room.
Woo!
Yay.
I'm in the briefing room.
He's here. All right. How are you doing today, Wrongthinker?
I'm doing pretty good. Super excited for the upcoming event, as I admittedly always am. I'm probably about as biased a source as you can get, but yeah, doing good. Having a good time, sipping a delicious carbonated beverage, and life is grand. Nice.
Well, we allow, all the burps possible.
All the burps possible.
In the Burny's briefing room.
There could be burps in Burny's briefing room. New name for this. We've come up with it a few seconds in.
Burpee's briefing room.
Burping. Yeah. We're gonna think about that.
Yeah.
We're gonna think about that.
We'll get back to you guys. All right. That's awesome to hear. So why don't we get down to business? For those out there who aren't aware, can you kind of go more into what a lead designer actually does? Do you make the game yourself? And kind of give us some more insight on that.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually think there is a perception on the forums, and among the community in general, really, that, some people don't realize that we have a pretty big game team that works on the game. Obviously we have engineers and artists, but we also have a team of designers. We have a couple of guys who work on creating the levels, some that work on units. And my role in particular is I often describe it as sort of a compass, in a sense. I'm sort of a team compass, which maybe oversimplifies a little, but I'm sort of involved in all those creative discussions, and I certainly make plenty of calls, but I really work with a team of immensely talented people, and it's my job to just shove everyone in the right direction, so to speak, more so than it is to come up with every unit or come up with every mechanic. I'm definitely... again, I'm responsible for some of them, for sure, for better and for worse, I'm sure, over the years at this point, but definitely not one dude in a garage.
Damn, too bad. I think that's what we were all hoping for.
Yep. Pros and cons to that, for sure.
So when you guys are going about designing, say, a new unit or a new event, can you kind of go through the process from the beginning to the end?
Yeah, that's a good question. So typically... the starting point lately has been we start by deciding what faction the unit is going to be and what role the unit is going to fill. So we have different stratifications of units in the game. Of course, we have sort of our standard faction units. We have hero units, and we have our unique units, which are sort of our highest power tier. So that factors into it. But really, the faction is a big starting point. Of course, part of the reason we introduced factions into the game was we wanted an excuse to add more variety into the experience. And the factions are a great way to do that because, the survivors tend to rely on numbers, corpus on their technology, and sentinels on brute force. And what's nice about that is from that comes a great diversity in what we're thinking about with units. So we're not just creating units that are pure generalists necessarily. It gives us a good flavor. And so we start there, and then we just try and come up with something unique that makes sense and can compete favorably with other units in the field of battle. And lately we've been pushing things a little bit more to make the units themselves, and I'm going to have to use this term even though I just used it in a different way, but to make units in general more unique.
Right. To
make them play differently and interestingly, because we really don't want people to get bored with just another machine gunner. Doesn't mean we'll never release another guy that shoots a machine gun. Could happen. Will probably happen at some point. But we don't want to just rely on tropes. We want to be interesting and original, and we can be to make the game fun for people.
Right. And since, War Commander is such a, it's an older game.
It is.
Are you guys running into any sort of challenges while you're designing new units, in efforts to be more unique?
Yes and no. That's fascinating to think about. We obviously, the more units that are in the game, the more challenging it is to come up with something that hasn't been done before. Just simple math would dictate, well, once you've come up with, the first unit is easy to be original, the 201st is much more difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But the flip side of the coin is, sometimes we, inspiration can strike, or, we've fixed some aspects of the game so we get increased resources to develop a unit that has some special functionality. And, internally there's a leadership group. I talked about being the lead designer. There's other members in the leadership group. Of course, there's a lead engineer and a lead artist, and we collaborate. We work together. But lately we've been kind of pushing to really on the front of let's devote more resources to making interesting units, to making them fun. And I think we've seen some of that lately.
Awesome.
I think we're going to see it more so in the coming months as well.
Cool. I'm sure we can go on and on, about unit design and, what goes in
for sure
to, different design aspects of the game. But why don't we move on to the monthly events?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so we got really great feedback from Operation Resurrection, but, not so much from Thorium Rush.
Yeah.
So what went horribly wrong there?
Well, definitely some things. I'll start with, sort of the goals for Thorium Rush. So there was a lot of good and a lot of bad that came from, I think, Resurrection. And I would say more good than bad. But it was also an extremely, extremely lengthy event.
That's right. There were 3 tracks, right?
Yeah, that's correct. There were 3 tracks. We had the zombie track had 10 missions, which was out of nowhere, with sort of unprecedented. Like, you get to play as the zombies, which was really cool, but we added a lot of content that was dedicated for them, which we had to do because they're melee units. If you just took the zombies up against a normal base, it would... It's a can of worms. Let's call it a can of worms.
A can of zombie worms?
A can of zombie worms. I mean, the zombies might come with worms, actually.
They probably do.
They've built-in worms. But in any case, the event was really, really big, really, really lengthy, and I think because of those unique experiences in there, there's a lot of fun that came from that. But we also wanted to create an event that was more concise after that event shipped, because first of all, creating that much is a tremendous drain on the team. So we wanted to optimize that a little bit and make sure that we weren't driving ourselves to an early grave, which is appropriate for Resurrection, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
But we literally cannot do that for every event. So there had to be some changes there. But also, we do get feedback from players about the grind a lot. And if a player wants to complete an event twice, and there's, 30-some missions, then completing it twice is a sum total of 60-some missions, or even 70.
Right.
And that's a ton of content for a player who wants to replay a couple of times. So we swung the pendulum very far in the other direction, and we consolidated down to a much smaller number of missions, which we really wanted to do to favor people who wanted to do that sort of replay experience. And that caused some people to like the shorter structure. Some people did say positively, we like the shorter structure, that's cool. But it also caused some problems, which you were talking about, with difficulty.
Right.
And the big issue was if you imagine the difficulty increases, let's say we have an event that has 100 missions, and the event increases in difficulty 1% per mission. So mission 1 is 1% difficult, and mission 100 is 100% difficult. Well, if you condense that down to 10 missions, the hardest mission could still be 100%.
Right.
Mission 10 could be 100% difficult, but to make that work, you have to have, the second mission be 20% rather than 2. In other words, we're increasing the slope of the difficulty. And I think that caused a lot of frustration in players who wanted to get farther into the event and couldn't because the slope of the difficulty was higher. Even though the last missions weren't intended to be any more difficult than the previous event's last missions, because that slope was so much steeper, people really felt frustrated. And we also made the mistake of lowering the number of replays. And we tried to compensate for that by moving the replay token as an earlier prize, but it just wasn't enough. And it ended up, lower, and even some mid-level players sort of struggled because they had such a finite number of replays, and that slope was steeper, so they just didn't have a good event experience from that.
Yeah, so you just mentioned the replay tokens. What kind of went into the design decision to lower the amount that we were giving out for Operation Thorium Rush compared to previous events?
Yeah, so what we wanted to do is we sort of wanted to get this from two directions. So there's this, when we talk about grinding it out, there's a desire within, I think, all of us when we're playing a game, any game, to get the best outcome we can. We want to get the best outcome. But sometimes getting the best outcome isn't in alignment with having the best experience.
Right.
That's a very interesting problem. From a game design perspective, that's a very challenging problem to solve. So when we look at restart tokens, or replay tokens, whichever is the official term, when we look at those tokens, what players would often do is they would play through the event a couple of times, and then they would spam sort of those replay tokens to grind the early missions because it gets them a little more experience, and those missions are free to a high-level player. So they increase their own rewards, but they're having kind of this boring grind through half the event experience. So what we wanted to do is, by compressing the event size, moving the replay token earlier, we actually were trying to discourage that a little bit. We wanted you to, we actually kept the experience payouts in the cumulative event very, very high. I think the total event had about 95% the experience of the previous event, but had 60% the mission. So the per mission XP payout was really, really high in this new one. And so our hope was, hey, players will have more fun because they'll actually, be able to work through the missions that they're more engaged in, rather than just grinding out free missions where they're, not even really playing the game. They're just kind of clicking go. So that's why we reduced the number, and also made it easier to get more replay tokens. But again, it was sort of a catch-22 because with the difficulty slope being higher, lots of players still couldn't reach it. So even if we achieved that goal for our higher, mid-high, and high-level players, there was a negative consequence, an unforeseen consequence, that it handicapped some of our mid-low and lower-level players.
Yeah. Yeah, so you mentioned difficulty a lot, and I think many of the complaints that we received were from our kind of mid to low tier players. So I'm sure they'll be interested to know kind of what went into the decision to increase the slope of the difficulty for Thorium Rush. For sure.
I definitely think, honestly, it was sort of a byproduct of the shortening of the event structure overall. It boils down to, we didn't want the later missions to be easier. The last mission we wanted to be just as hard as our previous last mission, give or take. And so, and we wanted the earlier missions to be as easy as the earlier missions before. But when you compress that whole spectrum down from 35 missions to 10 missions, the slope as a byproduct of that just gets steeper.
Yeah.
So in a sense, the cumulative difficulty wasn't significantly higher or higher at all, but when you were playing the event, you would hit difficult missions much more quickly.
Right.
So it would feel like you were making less progress, in a sense, before you reached a point of challenge. and that is definitely not really what we were going for. Like, we didn't want that to be a negative experience the way it ended up being.
So when you're going in and designing, the missions, how do you determine the difficulty to, implement for the defensive missions as well as the offensive?
So there's a slightly different methodology depending on whether or not it's an attack mission or a defense mission. With the defensive missions, I guess there's similar methodologies. They're not entirely disparate, I guess. In both cases, we have a reasonably sized QA staff, and they provide us with, they'll throw units at the bases, and we have varying degrees of skill level on the team, and some people will even play down to try and so we're all developers, right? So theoretically, we can flip a switch and all have everything, but we know that's not the average player experience.
Right.
So we try and create unit sets that adhere to different points in player progression. So, for example, we might have one person play through relying primarily on, without uniques, for example, and just using Gen 1 faction content, so Liberators and so forth, to see how far they can get before needing to repair, or how many Liberators they would need. And then we do the same for, now we have a high-tier player account equivalent,
right?
Where we have, this person has everything and, is incredibly powerful. How far can they get before they hit friction, and so forth. So we generate from that just sort of a graph set that literally shows us, okay, here's the amount of damage people are taking. If they use different tactics, how much can they save on that? And we always try and make sure that, most bases, I think all bases, actually have a spectrum. They all have different solutions. And some are always more efficient than others. And we always try to make sure there's at least one or two efficient solutions. And then as long as we have a handful of really good efficient solutions, we feel generally good about that base design.
Awesome. I think one of the main concerns players have when it comes to, difficulty, not just in the monthly events, but in pretty much everything else we do is, the repair cost. Do you guys factor that kind of thing in when you're designing, the bases and the difficulty of the defensive missions?
Yeah, we do actually look at that. We made a decision over a year ago now, basically with the start of the faction era, sort of unify our repair structure a little bit. So all faction units have a 9-hour repair time for a full platoon of that unit type. So if you have a full platoon of Liberators and they get totally wiped, they're going to be about 9 hours. And that's uniform for, Hades. It's uniform for Phalanx. If all of your Phalanx in a platoon get wiped, it's about 9 hours. And there's reasons that math isn't always perfect, but it's generally close. And every now and then we do an exception. For example, the technical has the talent at max level when you get it to level 10 that it reduces that 9-hour for a platoon to 8 hours. That's their talent.
That's awesome.
Which is cool. But so we leave the door open to exceptions, but generally that's a rule. So we're able to use that as a metric because it's standardized between our units. So that actually hopefully made things a little more understandable for the players when we did that, but it also helps us with our testing as well.
Yeah, that's really good to know. All right, so can you give us any insight into, how you're going about designing the difficulty for the next monthly event in December?
Absolutely. So I think difficulty is I'm going to use a slightly different word when we talk about difficulty here, which is I'm going to describe it as a value proposition. It's sort of the game designery term for difficulty. So it's not just about how much damage you take.
Right.
It's about what you get out of that effort and what kind of reward you get. So, for example, if you said, well, this base is really hard, but if you beat that base, if you got 10,000 gold for beating the base, you go, well, maybe that's not so hard, because if I beat it, I get 10,000 gold. So it's all about maintaining a good value prop. And so we're doing some things to try and address a series of concerns players had with Thorium Rush. So what we're actually going to do, and we were looking at XP payouts specifically, one of the challenges we run into, which I described a little bit earlier, is that some people have a tendency to farm out XP from the lower levels at the detriment of having a fun experience because it's rewarding.
Right.
But the flip side is if we make those values too low, then a low-level player can't earn enough experience to increase their power, to try and aspire to become more powerful in the game. So we're actually going to do something pretty interesting for this next event, where the earlier missions are actually going to pay out much less XP, but they're going to give out units themselves. So you're going to earn a lot more of, so for lower level players, they'll be able to earn a lot more units than they have in previous events, just by beating those super early missions. For a high level player, they'll earn those units, and it's not super helpful, but those missions are super, super easy for them anyway.
Right.
And the total XP amount isn't really changing much. So all that XP that's being moved out of those lower missions in favor of giving them high-cost units. So, and just for frame of reference, like let's say a Liberator costs 25,000 XP for a single Liberator. Well, now, on the first mission, you might get 3 Liberators. So it's like 75,000 XP worth of units that will help you grow in power as a lower level, and that you just won't need to use XP for. So XP is shifting a little bit to be more valuable for mid and higher tier players. And so we're actually taking XP from 2 directions. I heard a concern last time as well from multiple players. There's too much XP in the final faction mission. So it's like, yeah, the total event XP is okay, but if I don't beat that final faction track, like the final faction track mission, I'm losing like a third of that XP, which is huge.
Yeah, definitely.
And I hear that concern. So we're actually taking some XP out of that as well, and all that's being distributed around. So what you're going to see is missions in the main track, outside of those first few where we're giving out units, are going to pretty quickly escalate to giving more meaningful XP payouts than previously. And of course, the higher missions are still going to be worth more, but you're going to see a better slope of rewards there, to justify the fact that there is that like higher slope of general difficulty curve. And we did want to keep the shorter event structure. So what we're trying to do, because again, some players really like that shorter event structure. So we're trying to have our cake and eat it too. Like, we're trying to make everyone happy here. So we're keeping the shorter event structure. We're putting great Gen 1 faction units as free prizes for just beating those super early missions, which is, I believe we have it on the first 3 as well as the first faction. Previously, it was just the first faction you could get units for winning, but now it's like the first 3 you can get units.
That's awesome.
As well as the first faction. So you're seeing a shift there, and then more XP in the main track, so that if you can't make it all the way to the final faction mission, you should be earning more XP than you did last time, like if you're making it to the middle of the main track. And so hopefully all that will result in an event that is playable for almost any type of player, and any type of player will be able to make some progress towards bettering themselves, as long as they put in the work to do it.
That's awesome. I'm sure many of the players will enjoy those kind of changes.
Yeah, fingers crossed. We're giving it a shot for sure.
Awesome. So I think this is a good transition into the event store itself. As we're talking about XP and the payouts you get from the different tracks. Some of the complaints that I've been seeing on the forums is that the items in the event store are too expensive or unobtainable for some people. And then in Operation Thorium Rush, we also threw in the trophy, being only able to be unlocked from the event store. So can you kind of go through, what design changes or thoughts went into that, and how you're approaching that for the next event?
For sure. So there's 2 parts to the question. I'll talk about the trophy first.
Sure.
With the trophies specifically, because there was a lot of that sort of grind out XP from lower bases, and we had internal talks about this, we actually wrestled with whether or not to make the trophy require beating the event. But we ultimately ended up all feeling pretty strongly that the whole point of a trophy is to show a certain level of skill and power. That you really, to make it something that's truly an achievement. And so to that end, we felt like conquering the event demonstrates that you have mastery over the event, and then that warrants you having access to this trophy. So that was kind of why we made the decision. We wanted that trophy to mean more than it had in the past. We wanted it to be a true badge of honor. So we actually understand this means fewer players are going to get the trophy. But in a sense, that's kind of the point. The trophy is supposed to be an exclusive for people who actually conquer the event. And I think for those who do earn it, it will have more meaning. And for people who don't earn it, it's something more to aspire to. where when you reach that point where you're able to earn that trophy, that's a much bigger win than it used to be. So that's the answer to the trophy part of that question, and we are retaining that for the next event.
Okay, that's good to know.
So the second part of the question is, sort of how items might be overpriced in the store.
Yeah.
And I think so with anything like that, there's two directions that we can address that from. We can either lower prices or we can increase payouts. And in a sense, we're leaning towards the former. That is to say, we're increasing, or I don't forget which was the former. I don't even remember which order said. But the point is, there's more XP in that main track now.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is empower people to get more XP from the main track. So for mid-tier players, you should be able to get more from the store. The total XP for the whole event isn't changing from the last time. So if you push through everything, you're getting the same amount. But for players who aren't pushing through everything, you're actually going to be getting more.
Awesome.
So for players who are having difficulty there, hopefully they will be having a little bit less difficulty and be able to purchase a little more of the goodies they want.
Cool. So we're running short on time.
True story.
I wanted to ask you about the Dracon unit or the Dracon unit. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
People are pronouncing it in all different ways.
So for what it's worth, I pronounce it Dracon.
Dracon.
Like dragon. Kind of.
I pronounce it Dracon.
Yeah,
like something else that I can't think of.
Yeah, that's entirely fair. And to be truthful, there might, I think it's actually, I forget who proposed that name. I did not come up with that name, but I liked it a lot. I think it's from like Greek mythology or something. It's not actually Drake. We can look that up. That's a good one for future in terms of the naming. But
we'll put a briefing up on the forums for that.
Yeah. So for those who are debating on the forums and among the community how to pronounce it, we're doing that internally too.
That's good. Okay, so what were your thoughts on the unit itself, and also the first single-use hero, Max?
Yes. So for the Dracon itself, that was a great instance of where we started really pushing. It's really the start of our initiative to push for more original, interesting content in the game, and that will absolutely continue. I think we've already seen some of the Siege Squadron. When you see the Siege Squadron boss base, you'll get a sense of how it's also going to be something pretty unique and original. And we're really excited to start pushing the bounds of what you expect for a unit. And for the Dracon, again, I think the gameplay of the Dracon is so interesting because you want to maintain that maximum range. It deals more damage the farther the plasma travels. So they're actually relatively weak to something like an Acolyte, or they're really weak to a War Dog, because a War Dog gets in there, and not only will the War Dog chew through them, so to speak, pretty quickly, but they're not going to take much damage in the process because of how close they are to the units.
Exactly.
So they offer really compelling strengths and also really compelling weaknesses, and I think that's the sign of a good unit, is because that means it's got clear use cases, but you can screw it up, and people can play against you, and that's...
Yeah, and that adds a lot of strategy to the game.
Absolutely, and that kind of strategy is really what we're after, for sure.
So what kind of new units can we be expecting in the near future?
Yes. So in the upcoming, we haven't revealed the upcoming unit yet in full, but we're going to push things even farther with one of the craziest ideas we've ever had. I guess the best teaser to give is that the next unit can't attack at all.
Oh.
It has no attack. And we think it's amazing.
So I can't wait to write the briefing on that one.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Damage, 0. But we think this one's a real winner, and it's so unlike anything else. I'm so excited for this unit. It is a Sentinels unit, I can say that. I think people know that's going to be the case. But it's very interesting.
Cool. I'm sure the players, they're going to be thinking about this nonstop.
Yeah, for sure. I hope so.
Awesome.
Units teased.
Yeah. All right. Well, I really appreciate you, taking the time to join me on the first installment of Burny's Briefing Room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any final thoughts about, Operation Thorium Rush or anything in the world of War Commander?
Yeah, I think the one thing I want to say is I want to echo something you said earlier, actually, which is how appreciative we are. Within the past 3 or 4 months or so, we started sending out those surveys, and we don't send those out to not read them. Like, we look at them, we, Burny sends out, he reviews like the cumulative data. Many of the leads group will review that data, and it's like we look at this stuff. Is the point? We are so grateful to the community for actively responding. I think we got a good number of results for the survey of players filling it out, and that stuff is really, really helpful for us. So your honest feedback, both the good and the bad, is constructive and is valuable. So we're really appreciative of that, and we look at it, and it's just another way we collect information from you guys to make the game better, along with forums and so forth. But so thanks so much for taking your time, community, to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point is, we're just as passionate about the game as, all of our players are. So that's kind of what goes into those surveys and how we review them.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. So that'll do it. Do it for us here today. We wish all of you watching or listening a very happy holidays, and hope you guys are excited for things to come in War Commander. He's Wrongthinker, and I am CM Burny, signing off.
Take care, everyone.